West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
In one generation, we have moved from denying a black man service at a lunch counter to elevating one to the highest military office in the nation and to being a serious contender for the presidency. This is a magnificent country. I am proud to be one of its sons. Thank you very much.
General Colin Powell in 1995 announcing that he would not make a run for the U.S. presidency. General Powell had retired from the U.S. military 2 years earlier in 1993. Public opinion polling at the time showed that he was the single most popular public figure in the United States of America at that time. Before he made that speech in 95 announcing he would not run for the presidency, it was very, very possible that he would run. He had written two speeches, one announcing he'd run and one announcing that he wouldn't. Either was possible. He had written a memoir that was a smash success. People mobbed his book events as if they were campaign events. He did travel, including to some of the crucial early states. He did some campaign-style events to basically test the waters and see if running for president was going to be right for him. Colin Powell had been an independent and legitimate nonpartisan throughout his 35 years of military service. Both parties, in fact, considered him as a potential standard bearer in a presidential campaign before he did test the waters in 1995. But in 1995, when he was testing those waters, he made clear that he was a Republican. He said so after leaving the military. The nomination he thought about pursuing for 1996 would have been the Republican Party's presidential nomination, which meant that in 1996, he would have been running to try to make Bill Clinton a one-term president. If he had succeeded in the Republican primary and received his party's nomination, that general election that year would have been incumbent President Bill Clinton versus Republican nominee Colin Powell. My friend Steve Bennin, who is a longtime producer on this show, he writes Maddow blog, he was a White House intern that day in 1995 when Colin Powell announced that he would not run for president. Steve told me today, quote, "You'd be amazed at how many people in the Clinton White House that day were watching General Powell's speech live because the stakes were so high." General Powell died today at the age of 84 from complications of COVID-19. He was 84 years old. He had survived an earlier bout with prostate cancer. He had Parkinson's disease. He also had multiple myeloma, which is a form of cancer that meant that he was severely immune suppressed. Being vaccinated against COVID-19, as General Powell was, it greatly reduces your risk of getting COVID. It greatly reduces your risk of dying from COVID if you do get infected. But with the rest, as is true with the unvaccinated population, age and medical comorbidities make things worse. With his age and with his other medical issues, he was profoundly vulnerable in the case of infection, and ultimately he did not survive it. He was National Security Advisor to President Ronald Reagan. He was Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to Presidents George H.W. Bush and to President Clinton. He was Secretary of State to President George W. Bush. Left government office in 2004. At each of those tiers of achievement, Colin Powell was the first African American to hold any of those positions. The Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist Gene Robinson at the Washington Post wrote today, quote, "Powell long knew how his obituaries would someday describe him. The first African American Secretary of State, the first African American Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the first African American National Security Advisor to the President." Robinson wrote, quote, "There is a special pride, but also a special burden in being the first black fill in the blank." Colin L. Powell shouldered that responsibility while giving the impression that the weight was light as a feather. He was the son of immigrants from Jamaica. He was born in Harlem, raised in the South Bronx. He went to City College in New York, entered the Army through the ROTC program. He was highly decorated for 2 long, difficult combat tours in Vietnam. He was the youngest 1-star general in the United States Army by the time he was 42 years old. He led the invasion of Panama. He led the first Gulf War in 1991. But his impact on the country was beyond even what he did in the U.S. military and the strength of his example as a public servant. It was profoundly political. He announced that he was a Republican in 1995. He announced that he could no longer consider himself a Republican this year, after the attack on the U.S. Capitol by Trump supporters on January 6th. That said, he was still a Republican, and he was a decades-long friend of John McCain, someone who'd been floated as a potential running mate for John McCain in 2008, when Colin Powell instead shocked the country by endorsing the Democratic candidate who was running against John McCain. He endorsed Democratic candidate Barack Obama for president. That was 2 weeks before the election in 2008, and some people say that the election might as well have just ended then. If Republicans needed permission to cross the aisle and vote for this Democrat, Barack Obama, nobody could provide a more powerful permission slip than Colin Powell did 2 weeks before that election. His political impact was profound, and it was complex. Of course, in the first sentence of every obituary of General Powell today, along with all of the firsts, and there were many of them, there is also the apex tragedy of his time in public life. His 76-minute-long speech in February 2003 to the United Nations, in which he made a long, detailed, fairly impassioned, and ultimately profoundly false case to the world that the United States needed to invade Iraq, and urgently.
Every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
I remember listening to that live when it happened, listening to those opening lines and being bewildered that this man, that Colin Powell, was making this case. But of course it was him. The tragedy of that moment unfolded soon in Iraq with the U.S. invasion and in the lives of everyone touched by that catastrophic war, which was launched on those false pretenses. But the tragedy of that moment was because of who he was. It was only because General Colin Powell had so much credibility, rightfully earned, that they put him out to make the most unbelievable, unsustainable, ultimately unforgivable false argument for the Iraq war. If they hadn't had him, they wouldn't have made that case that way. If they'd only been able to put out someone of lesser stature, lesser reputation, less widespread respect, if they hadn't had him, they would have had to aim lower in making that case. The false pretext for the war was that much more false and that much more spectacularly made, specifically because they had him. Because they had someone so respected to use as a mouthpiece for it. And for that, General Colin Powell, lost to us today, is a tragic figure. Not a victim. He wasn't unwillingly or unwittingly used. He knew what was up. That speech was something he spoke bluntly about within 2 years of making it. It was a source of lifelong regret for him, about which he was outspoken. And for all of us, we are all more than the worst thing that we have ever done, right? In the case of Colin Powell, he was so much more than that terrible worst thing that he did, which again was a lifelong source of regret, and which will inflect forever our understanding of how he changed American life, American history, in ways hard to attribute, in ways large and small, but large in ways that people who aren't U.S. presidents almost never attain.
It is Tuesday, the 19th of October of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Oh, you know, a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has, and it always will. Okay. Well, the spice trade was a very important part of the development of the world. It's all about taste. Hey, looks like Steve Bannon continues to ignore a lawful subpoena. I have a question. The Biden DOJ is drawing terrorism charges against several Black Lives Matter protesters in New York for pounding on an abandoned cop car, not destroying it, mind you, just pounding on it. Terrorism charges, not state. We're talking federal terrorism charges against Black Lives Matter protesters for pounding on an abandoned cop car. And Steve Bannon is able to ignore the subpoena and to enforce it would show some sort of partisanship? Excuse me. Let's not talk about partisanship here when you're throwing the book at some Black Lives Matter protesters pounding on an abandoned cop car during a Black Lives Matter protest about the abuse of cops or the abuse by cops. And I gotta say, watching these cops whine, some are literally crying when they're getting a shot. What the hell happened? Why is Tucker Carlson not whining about the lack of manliness by these, fraidy cats? Of course, on the other hand, the only way you can be a cop now is if you have irrational fear and will react accordingly. Very fast, very definite, and, for all time. So, boy, the world is topsy-turvy. I still want to know, all of those military guys who had about 14 vaccinations before they got this one. What is it about this one? I asked that question on the Tim Coromal show. I ask it here. Of course, I'm just being rhetorical. We know exactly why. I don't want to talk about who is the adult in the room. They have never been adults. The projection has always been exactly that. Now we find out that apparently Epstein and others had pretty much abducted a girl for their fun and games. And I don't know if it was in New York. It might have been. But regardless, the point being is that she was abducted in front of a pizza parlor. Pizzagate? Everything is projection with these people. Everything. This whole story about Hunter Biden. We know exactly why that is out there. It's to take heat off of the Trump kids. And I don't mean the little Damien one that's grown up to be about 6'3". Still a kid. That's Damien. I'm telling you, the devil is in that kid. Eee, scary. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But we're talking about the other 3 Trump kids who have been involved in the most criminal activity long before Donnie became president. As well as Donnie been involved in all of the criminal activities he's been involved in. How do you bankrupt a bunch of casinos and the Italian mob doesn't do anything to you? I'll tell you why. It's because you're now taking Russian mob money. All right. So Donald Trump refused to answer questions in the deposition. Mm-hmm. Can you do that? I guess he thinks he can. He's suing the archives, the National Archives. Can you do that? Can you sue the National Archives? What is wrong with these people? I'll tell you what's wrong. They think the laws don't apply to them. As far as I'm concerned, they're stateless actors, and they should be, dealt with accordingly. You are a stateless actor fomenting violence in our society to overthrow the government? Huh. What is that called? The mind reels trying to want to figure that one out. I'm only being rhetorical. All right. Well, there's so much more going on. That Greenberg guy, I guess he's got more beans to spill and he's spilling them. Matt Gaetz is a little concerned. He's upset because that PAC that he and Marjorie Taylor Greene put together is out of money. He was hoping he could raise a lot more. But, he kind of timed it. He thought, at some point, maybe I'm going to be in jail. I don't have to pay for any of this stuff. I don't think that's how he's thinking about it. But he wasn't counting on old Greenberg there having more beans to spill. Nope. Not one bit. Christopher Steele is back in the news. Yes. Now, everybody forgets. The Mueller report corroborated a hell of a lot in the Steele dossier. It wasn't a dossier. They keep calling it that because they're trying to make it into something that it wasn't. It was raw data. And you take raw data with a grain of salt because that's what it is. Raw data is just, you're picking it up. You heard some credible evidence from various sources that Trump had some Russian hookers pee on the bed that Michelle and Barack had slept on when they were in Moscow. As some sort of, top dog kind of thing, right? And Trump all along has said he doesn't do that and he doesn't have it done to him. Well, of course not. That's not what the raw data said. So give me a break. So essentially, Steele is still saying, that one, that evidence there, that storyline is fairly credible. Now he says it's not 100% credible, but he stands by his report. So let us not forget that this whole thing started because Trump took succor and money and help from a hostile foreign power who had already dedicated their efforts to weakening the United States, and never in their wildest dreams did they think that this would happen. Well, I got to tell you, you don't know America, do you? Now you do. Mm-hmm. Home of the brave. Give me a break. All right, what's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this fine Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, indeed. Well, Colin Powell's impact on history was profound, complex, and tragic indeed. On the rest of the menu, district attorneys risk losing their jobs by refusing to prosecute controversial GOP-led laws. The District of Columbia has suspended most of its metro trains over a lingering safety issue that caused a dramatic derailing last week. And 2 former security services executives pleaded guilty to rigging bids for U.S. security contracts. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Italy's fascist party suffered an embarrassing blow after center-left forces won mayoral races across the country. I should note this is in the run-up to the premiership elections that happen in several months, a little bit more. And these mayoral races pretty much is the finger to the wind. And France announced its ambassador to Belarus has been forced to leave the country. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is our chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link across the page, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, gosh, that helps so much. I'll tell you why, because if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink and send those funds to us once a month, we're able to stretch those dollars really beyond compare. And we're able to pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue this powerhouse of resistance against, well, a hostile takeover of the United States of America. We're the poison pill in the works, and we won't let it happen. And we also thank you for, well, helping us fulfill our civic duty. We take it quite seriously. If you would then look, if you would like to follow, thank you for your generosity and thank you for considering generosity in the future. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime. Well, that's when it gets posted. And then I try to link it up on Twitter and other social media platforms. Sometimes during that opening clip. Sometimes later. I'm sorry. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, you can do so at Cookbook West. And most importantly, please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe is by Jonathan Matisse of the Associated Press. When Republican lawmakers in Tennessee blocked a policy to ease up on low-level pot cases, Nashville's top prosecutor decided on a workaround. He just didn't charge anyone with the crime. Meanwhile, in Georgia, the Gwinnett County solicitor vowed not to punish anyone for the crime of distributing food or water to voters in line. Tampa's chief prosecutor says a law that allows law enforcement to detain protesters until their court date is an assault on our democracy. And a district attorney in Douglas County, Kansas, promised not to enforce a new state law that makes it harder for nonpartisan groups and neighbors and candidates to collect and return absentee ballots for voters. Progressive prosecutors around the country are increasingly declaring they just won't enforce some GOP-backed state laws, a strategy at work in response to some of the most controversial new changes in recent years. Near-total abortion bans, voting restrictions, limits on certain protest activity, laws aimed at LGBTQ people, and restrictions on mask requirements. The elected law enforcement leaders say they're just doing what is right, as support has grown for changing a system they believe has relied too heavily on locking people up, particularly for low-level, nonviolent offenses. But politics is also at play here. These lawyers live in deep blue districts where their decisions are popular with voters, and they have to be reelected. The real limit on this is political, said William and Mary Law School professor Jeffrey Bellin. These prosecutors have to stand for election almost everywhere in the country. Ultimately, the limit on this is popularity. Prosecutors wield wide discretion, sometimes wild discretion, over whom to charge with crimes, and they can hold off based on factors that include the strength of an individual case, the severity of the offense, and sometimes the prosecutor's view on a law's constitutionality. Last October, more than 70 prosecutors from blue districts around the country publicized that they will not bring charges under increasingly stringent laws that states have passed against abortion because they should not and will not criminalize health care decisions. And even if the landmark abortion rights case Roe v. Wade is eroded or overturned. And in June, more than 70 elected prosecutors and law enforcement leaders signed a similar letter pledging not to charge doctors or parents who could face criminal penalties under state laws, barring certain medical treatments for transgender youth. Tennessee passed a first-of-its-kind law this year that required a notice outside public bathrooms at businesses that effectively says transgender people could be inside. Well, the district attorney in that region made it known that he would not be enforcing that, saying his office will not promote hate. Judges paused the policies about bathroom signs and abortion reversals statewide and blocked the school mask opt-outs in 3 big counties in Tennessee. A Vermont state attorney isn't prosecuting possession of addiction therapy drugs, including buprenorphine. Seattle's county prosecutor stopped filing charges for small personal drug possession, and a prosecutor in Washtenaw County, Michigan, and multiple prosecutors in New York City have stopped charging prostitution crimes as long as it's consensual. In Philadelphia, before federal courts blocked the opening of overdose prevention sites, the district attorney said he would not charge people who open and run them. In Florida's 13th Judicial Circuit State, the attorney Andrew Warren, covering the Tampa area, called one new state law an assault on our democracy. It stiffens penalties for crimes committed during a riot or federal protest and was passed after protests in the wake of George Floyd's death. It is on hold by a federal judge. Ashraf Khalil of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Washington's regional metro system abruptly pulled more than half its fleet of trains from service early yesterday, Monday, over a lingering problem with the wheels and axles that caused a dramatic derailing last week. The ruling promises to complicate daily travel and commutes for thousands of riders for an unspecified length of time, while the National Transportation Safety Board investigates the issue. The Metro Authority Safety Commission ordered the withdrawal of the entire 7,000 series lines of trains overnight, The Kawasaki-made 7000 series are the newest set of trains in the service, and the 748 cars comprise about 60% of the fleet. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy told reporters yesterday, Monday, that a design flaw had been identified, which caused the train's wheels to spread too wide on the axles, allowing the carriage to slip off the tracks. It was not immediately clear if other regional commuter systems used the same model rail car, but Homendy said the NTSB may at some point issue a recommendation for inspections of all similar train cars around the country. The wheel issue is being blamed for an incident last week in which a train car slipped off the tracks on the Metro's Blue Line near Arlington National Cemetery. Homendy said the car had apparently derailed once and then reconnected with the rails by itself before derailing a second time. Some passengers were trapped in a tunnel in a dark train car and had to be evacuated on foot. Singh of Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Two former employees of security company G4S Secure Solutions pleaded guilty to criminal antitrust charges stemming from their involvement in a conspiracy to rig bids, fix prices, and allocate customers for defense-related security services contracts, the U.S. Justice Department said yesterday, Monday. Bart Verbeek, former Director of Sales, and Robbie Van Melle, former Director of Operations, admitted that they, with their co-conspirators at competing firms, colluded to allocate security services contracts and to fix the prices at which the firms bid for contracts. Both defendants are Belgian nationals residing in Belgium. The allocated contracts included those for guarding, mobile monitoring, and surveillance services with the United States through the Department of Defense and with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, Communications and Information Agency. As a result, the customers of the security services providers were deprived of a competitive bidding process and paid inflated, non-competitive prices for services, the DOJ said. Earlier this year, G4S pleaded guilty and was sentenced for its involvement in the conspiracy. The Department of Justice has also indicted several other members of the conspiracy. The DOJ investigation remains ongoing, the statement said. The division and its procurement collusion strike force partners will continue to investigate and prosecute both individual and corporate wrongdoers who seek to exploit the government procurement process. Acting Assistant Attorney General Richard Powers of the DOJ's Antitrust Division said. All right, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again. From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, A Mobster's Tale. The Many Saints of Newark functions as an indirect prequel to The Sopranos series. It's a standalone story from The Sopranos, the hugely popular HBO series that has enjoyed a revival of late. Set roughly 30 years before the start of the series, Saints is the study of a legendary character mentioned throughout, but whom the audience never actually meets, Dickie Moltisanti, the man who served as a mentor to the young Tony Soprano and whose son, Christopher, became Tony's adopted nephew and protege. We never see Dickie because he was killed in the 1970s for reasons that remain unclear. Having Christopher as the narrator is an interesting framing device because, as fans know, Chrissy wasn't exactly reliable. Nonetheless, his explanations taken at face value shed light on several characters and themes from the show. At its heart, The Sopranos was always about family, the ones chosen and the ones people are born into. In this case, Dickie, played by Alessandro Nivola, has what can only be called a complicated relationship with both. Ray Liotta does a fine job as Hollywood Dick and twin brothers Sally in familiar roles, and of course there's also the relationship with the young Tony, played mostly by the late James Gandolfini's real-life son, Michael. As we know, Tony ultimately makes his choice to go in a certain direction, but the what-if question remains. Michael Gandolfini appears to have inherited both his late father's looks and acting ability, and watching him work is a delight, though he's a bit underused. The movie is a revealing chapter in the Sopranos story and saves its best twist for last. As Tony might have said, The Many Saints of Newark ends in a way many may never see coming. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Where did life come from? How do stars and planets form? Professor Avina van des Hoek has devoted her career to answering these questions. In 2018, she received the Kavli Prize in Astrophysics for her work. Scientific American Custom Media, in partnership with the Kavli Prize, reconnected with Avina to discuss the latest developments in unraveling the mysteries of space. Avina van des Hoek is known for studying the universe, but her career could have gone in a completely different direction.
My scientific love is especially for molecules. I just had a very good high school teacher in chemistry and not so good in physics, and that's what drove me to chemistry at the university.
But then Avina's advisor died, and she was left without an academic direction.
My then boyfriend and now husband, he had actually just taken a course and he had heard about these molecules in interstellar space. And he said to me, well, isn't that something for you?
So Avina shifted her focus from chemistry on Earth to chemistry in space.
So it was actually, fantastic opportunity. Still the same molecules, but now in a much more interesting laboratory, actually. The biggest laboratory that you can imagine.
In that giant laboratory, Avina turned her attention not to planets and stars, but the space between them, called interstellar clouds.
It's such a tenuous gas that is there. Yet it is the material out of which new stars and new planets are being born.
Swirling around in these clouds are elements like carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. But how do they come together to form planets? In time, Avina and her colleagues realized that a key ingredient is space dust.
Think of sand grains, but then 1,000 times smaller than the grains of sand on a beach.
These little grains play an important role in building molecules. You see, space is so empty, it would take forever for atoms to bump into each other.
But the dust grains are actually a very good place for these atoms to land on. And once they are on the grains, to to actually meet each other and form a bond.
These dust grains make it possible for atoms to form everything from water to the hydrogen that helps an interstellar cloud collapse and turn into a star. But the dust isn't done yet. When a new star forms, the tiny particles swirl around it. Eventually, those pieces of dust collide and stick to each other.
Out of this micron size, you make pebbles, you make bricks, you make moon-sized bodies, you make Mars-sized bodies, and ultimately then you will make the core of a giant planet or an Earth-like planet.
Avina says experiments in the lab have helped her unravel how this process works, but she also relies on powerful telescopes, including what's known as ALMA, a field of 66 high-powered antennas in northern Chile.
It's at 5,000 meters altitude. We always talk about it as being a breathtaking experience to be there.
ALMA might have been a failure without Avina's help. She played a significant role in convincing scientists from different countries to work together on the project. Now that ALMA has been making observations for nearly 10 years, Avina says it's lived up to its expectations.
ALMA has really been a revolution in our field because it allows us to zoom in on these regions in which new stars and planets are formed.
Do you think we on Earth won the planetary lottery? Were we just incredibly lucky? Or is this just a natural consequence of all the different interactions you're observing in space?
Yeah, well, that's one of the fundamental questions, one of the biggest questions that mankind has. Are we alone? Were we the lucky ones?
Avina says, based on her research, water and the other ingredients you need to form life are present at the formation of nearly all new planets. Scientists also know that on average, every star has at least 2 planets.
Given that there are a few 100 billion stars even in our own Milky Way.
And even if only 1% of their planets were in the right location with the right conditions for life to form.
That already tells you that the chances are not slim. They are actually fairly large that something similar to what on Earth may also have happened on other planets.
Of course, Avina says the jury is still out about how often complex life, like human life, could develop on other planets. But we're not far from finding an answer.
In the coming decades, we will actually have the technology available to really start searching for the signatures of life.
One of those pieces of technology is the James Webb Space Telescope, which is set to launch later this year. The JWST will be powerful enough to zoom in on individual planets outside of our solar system, known as exoplanets.
Once JWST is launched, we and other groups are going to turn our telescopes on mature exoplanets and see whether there are possible signatures of life in those atmospheres.
Avina says it's an exciting time to study the universe.
We are now able to understand how we were formed. Think about our origins. It's right there in space, between the stars.
Thanks to Avina and her colleagues, we now know that our Earth grew from the tiniest particles of dust. And soon, we'll know if that same dust grew to form planets that other living beings call home. Avina van Disshoek is a professor of molecular astrophysics at Leiden University in the Netherlands. In 2018, she was the sole awardee for the Kavli Prize in Astrophysics. The Kavli Prize recognizes scientists for pioneering advances in the fields of astrophysics, nanoscience, and neuroscience. The Kavli Prize is a partnership among the Norwegian Academy of Science and Letters, the Norwegian Ministry of Education and Research, and the U.S.-based Kavli Foundation. This work was produced by Scientific American Custom Media and made possible through the support of the Kavli Prize.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Are congressional elections rigged?
I'm Tom Hartman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Consider Texas, which has had 36 congressional districts and due to the 2020 census now will have 38, and where, under the new map drawn by the legislature, 35 of the 38 seats, 92%, are designed to not be remotely competitive. 92%, thanks to what's called packing and cracking. Packing means packing persons with similar voting patterns into one district. Cracking means breaking up such a group into so many different districts that they can't really influence the outcome in any one. With sophisticated computer programs, these numbers can be calculated and predicted with surgical accuracy, and they have been. Placing the 2020 election results into the new districts shows that Trump would have won 23 of the 38 by double digits, and Biden would have won 12 by double digits, meaning that only 3 of the 38 had a margin of 10 points or less. In addition, despite the very large growth in the Latino population, the new map has no majority Latino district. In 2019, the Supreme Court 5-4 ruled that they would do nothing to interfere with partisan gerrymandering. So in Texas, and in every state where that's the norm, you will now be able to know the results of congressional elections before any ballots are cast. How, you might ask? Can you call such a system a democracy?
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because democracy and advocacy begin with you, and freedom can't defend itself.
Question: what does a packet of M&Ms and your local veterinarian have in common? Answer: both are owned by Mars, Inc., the global candy monopolist. Since the 1980s, we've seen massive consolidations in industry after industry, from airlines to newspapers, the internet to candy. These monopolists run roughshod over consumers, workers, communities, suppliers, and our nation's commitment to the common good. And now the corporate attitude seems to be, what the hell, why not let monopolization go to the dogs? This change has been led by private equity groups. They are corporate takeover sharks that borrow billions of dollars to buy out, plunder, then sell off the remnants of established businesses. They target enterprises that can be grabbed on the cheap but have assets like a loyal customer base. Then the sharks raise prices on those customers while cutting staff and quality of service. This has been happening to thousands of local vet practices and hospitals, which have quietly been plucked by Wall Street entities bearing nondescript acronyms like IVC, JAB, KKR, and VCA. At first, locals don't notice the takeover because the corporate outfit not only buys your friendly Dr. Barry Bones vet service, but they also buy the doc's name. As an IVC takeover consultant confided, people like to take their dogs to local vets and not feel like it's a corporate machine. But increasingly, it is. Solo practitioners now must answer to bean counters at headquarters, such as VCA, Veterinary Center of America, which has 1,000 vet practices across the country and is now owned by Mars, Inc. This is Jim Hightower saying one feisty group battling monopolizers is the National Veterinary Professionals Union. Get info at natvup.org. Howdy-ho, folks. Thanks for tuning in and sharing my weekly commentaries. Also, please join me for a live web show I host every other Tuesday, the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour at the Chat and Chew Cafe. You can join the action live online as I chat with grassroots leaders and progressive sparklies from around the country. Go to hightowerlowdown.org/chat-and-chew to find out about upcoming guests and watch past episodes. That's hightowerlowdown.org/chat-and-chew.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2013. That was the day that 2 workers on California's Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART as it is more commonly called, were struck and killed by a train. Christopher Shepard was a BART track engineer. Lawrence Daniels was a contract employee. Both men had years of experience working on the tracks. They were inspecting the tracks when they were hit and killed. Workers who usually operated the trains were out on strike. The Amalgamated Transit Union Local 1555 and SEIU Local 1021 had walked off the job the day before. The strike disrupted the daily commute of 400,000 Bay Area travelers. The unions were on strike for improved wages and safer working conditions. The union wanted bulletproof glass for station agent booths for worker safety. They also asked for improved lighting in the tunnels. According to an article in Mother Jones, quote, a BART spokesman called the safety issues a smokescreen, arguing that contract negotiations were not the place to raise them. In response to the strike, BART was training a replacement worker to run the train when the tragedy occurred. The manager, who was supposed to monitor the unexperienced driver, had left the car. In addition, the National Transportation Safety Board found that BART had no way for workers on the tracks to communicate with the drivers. The family of Lawrence Daniels sued BART, which settled for $300,000. The union and BART settled the strike 2 days after the tragic deaths. The union won nearly a 16% pay raise. The union also won safety upgrades, but management won concessions on employee contributions to medical benefits and pensions.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 36 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting to be a tad warmer than yesterday, bumping into maybe the mid-60s. We'll see if we get that warm. Let's see. It looks like partly cloudy skies this morning will become overcast during the afternoon, possibly dropping a little bit of rain during the day, but tonight we will have rain with lows in the mid-40s, winds out of the southeast at 5 to 10 miles per hour, bringing about a quarter of an inch, and we are also under an active wind advisory, so presumably the winds will pick up from the front of this storm coming in. Cloudy tomorrow with a slight chance of a rain shower, increasing overnight with highs in the low 60s. Winds ostensibly will be light and variable. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon have been updated from its weekend totals from Friday. And we now have increased once again to 227,083 infections, and our deceased have increased by 4 and now stands at 304. Ragweed pollen is rated low right outside the window here in Rogue River. The air quality index is good at 19 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at 2. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.92 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 68 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 75 and sunny. Rome is 72 and sunny. Kyiv is 48 and fair. Kabul is 60 degrees and clear. Hong Kong is 75 and fair. Tokyo is 55 degrees with heavy rain. Sydney, Australia is 58 and fair. San Francisco, California is 50 degrees and partly cloudy, and New York is 53 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Francis D'Amelio of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Italy's center-left forces won big in Rome, Turin, and several other mayoral runoffs yesterday, Monday, dealing embarrassing defeats to the anti-migrant and far-right parties that are hoping to capture Italy's premiership in the next national election. Roberto Gualtieri from Italy's Democratic Party trounced a challenger who had been selected by the Brothers of Italy, a party with neo-fascist roots, to win Rome City Hall, taking some 60% of the vote, with nearly all the ballots counted. Democratic Party leader Enrico Letta predicted that the center-left wins over right-wing alliances will dampen any push by conservative forces, which is a nice way of calling them fascists, which include the anti-migrant League Party, to hold an early national election. That enhances Premier Mario Draghi's prospects of continuing in office until Parliament's term expires in 2023. Letta also interpreted the Democratic Party-anchored winning alliances as resounding affirmation of Draghi's tough anti-pandemic policies. Those include a recently implemented Green Pass decree that workers must be vaccinated, recently recovered from COVID-19, or test negative for the virus to enter their workplaces. The rule has sparked protests, including violence, mainly by fascist right-wing opponents.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Staff at Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. France said yesterday, Monday, its ambassador to Belarus had left the country on the previous day, which must have been Sunday, because authorities in Minsk had asked him to leave after he did not present his credentials to President Alexander Lukashenko. The European Union has refused to recognize Lukashenko's election to a sixth presidential term, and in line with the bloc, the French envoy had not submitted his accreditation to Belarus's president for more than a year. Speaking to reporters in an online briefing, French Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Anne-Claire Legendre said Paris had taken proportional measures against Belarus following Minsk's decision. A diplomatic source speaking on condition that no one tell anybody who they are said Belarus's ambassador had been asked to leave Paris. The ambassador, Nicolas Delacoste, will now assume the role of special envoy for Belarus, while his number two at the embassy will take over his role. Relations between EU member states and Belarus have been at a low ebb since last year, when Lukashenko comfortably won re-election in an election the opposition said was rigged, and cracked down on the opposition, detaining all its leading figures or driving them into exile. That's the way the authoritarians work. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.